following is an interview with Andrew Eisenhauer. Andrew is an artist and mental health professional currently living in Savannah, Georgia, where he operates his art business. Throughout the interview, Andrew will reference his work as well as his portfolio, which is what you're seeing here. I will link the portfolio in the description of this video. By all means, check it out, give Andrew a contact, scroll through his artwork, and let him know what you think. If you enjoy the content of this video, please give it a like and a subscribe. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is a slightly different guest with me here today. It's different because I actually know Andrew in person. So I don't know if that's going to change the dynamic at all. And on top of that, on a regular basis, Andrew tries to kill me. So that may also change the dynamic a little bit. But I have with me here today Andrew. Andrew is a local artist, martial artist, and a friend of mine. So yeah, Andrew, welcome. Thanks for joining me this evening.
Anytime, Mike. My pleasure and my honor.
Awesome. Andrew, let's how about you start us off by telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and I think how you got into art. Like what led you down this path of becoming an artist?
Awesome. That's a very good question. And because I'm a guy who likes to prepare a lot, I actually brought a few notes about me so I could refer to the notes in case I get stage fright. So here we go. So my name is Andrew Eisenhauer. I'm an artist in Savannah, Georgia, and I work at Georgia Regional Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital that caters to disadvantaged populations. And I first reached out to Mike so that he could help me talk about my art and the cause that we go towards, which is helping the mental health patients at the hospital. So to answer your question, Mike, what got me into art was a couple things. The first thing was my grandfather, Old Salt. His real name was Pierre Pierce. He was a fishing captain in Bimini in the Bahamas and Miami in the 50s. And he taught me the importance of drawing from nature because we'd sit in his garage and draw spiders and lizards and squirrels and everything in Florida, crabs, fish. And he was a great sculptor who actually has, I don't know if you're familiar with The Old Man and the Sea, the book by Ernest Hemingway. So he has a huge Old Man in the Sea statue that he made that's in a museum right now. And it's awesome. Yeah. So he taught me a lot about how to draw from an early age. And the second thing was my parents buying me art supplies. So yeah, that's every parent tries to get their child involved in things. And I think it was my dad that got me into art because in elementary school, my friends and I would sit in class and we would draw anime and manga characters.
Heck yeah.
Are you a fan of anime?
Absolutely, yeah.
Nice. So we would draw Dragon Ball Z. We would draw like Vegeta and Goku and Cell and all those guys with the bulging muscles and the veins and everything.
Right.
We also used to draw comics from Shonen Jump. Are you familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we had the manga Shonen Jump, and that was back in the 90s, 2000s. So the comics were things like Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Yu Yu Hakusho. We were also into like the samurai animes, like what's the one, the famous samurai anime that was back in the 90s? Inuyasha.
Kenshin? Oh, Inuyasha, yeah. There's another one with the guy with red hair.
Yeah, I think that was Inuyasha, wasn't it?
Was Inuyasha the did he have like dog ears? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So we used to draw all that stuff, and my wife always talks about my artwork, saying like, I don't know where you get your style from. And a lot of people in America see these landscapes and they see like abstract art, but mine has a lot to do with comic books, like the characters, which I didn't give you an image of a character, but they all have like a very cartoonish look with the facial features and like, yeah. So that was how I got into it in school. And then also studying Sailor Jerry. I don't know if you're familiar. Sailor Jerry was the tattoo style that you see on the Vietnam era guys, like the snakes, the sharks. They're all nautical Navy tattoos. And I used to study. My mom bought me a maybe 300-page book of all the Flash, the tattoo art from that period. And I used to just sit there and stare at it for hours, hours collectively, and just look at it. Also, that shows the difference between my mom and dad, because while my mom was encouraging art, she was always encouraging me to be like a fancy artist who drew what he wanted to draw and who was drawing about like flowers and love and romantic things. And my dad was encouraging me to be like an artist businessman. Like, son, you don't want to be starving. You need to produce what the public wants. Find out what they want. Go get it. That kind of thing. So that was the big difference. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
It does. And Andrew, if I'm not mistaken, so you talked a little bit about your artistic influences. Would you say that like where you're from influences your style at all?
Yeah, so I didn't say that, but I'm from the Caribbean, St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, and I would say it definitely did. Hard to describe, but I think we didn't have a lot to do in the Caribbean like you would in the States. Like, we didn't have a lot, so we kind of found fun by after school drawing and reading comics. And a lot of people don't read comics that much these days, especially young children. They're watching it. So I would say it definitely did influence my style.
And so you grew up in the U.S. you said U.S. Virgin Islands, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you grew up there. When did you come to the States? Mainland.
I came to the mainland when I was like my whole life to see my mom for the summers.
Okay. Gotcha.
But I really lived with my dad in the Caribbean until I was 25. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
5-star Islander.
Gotcha. What about, so you have and for a point of reference, we are going to kind of break down a piece of art that Andrew sent us. I'll also link Andrew's portfolio in the description of this video. If you're interested, it might be helpful to, like, as you're listening to this, to kind of pull up the portfolio and kind of scroll through to kind of see what you're talking about. But yeah, I was trying to figure out a way to describe in words your art style. How would you describe it? Like, what would be your like elevator pitch to somebody that just like stumbled across you?
That's a very good question. I would describe it as abstract cartoonism. It's also a little bit of symbolism, and it's also a little bit of surrealism. So to answer your question, what I want to label it as is symbolism, but that's not to say that if I put the image into Microsoft Bing in some sort of art evaluator, that it would give me some sort of different style, because I honestly don't know the style. So I just say symbolism.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Symbolism, because I know this is like a really the big challenge in like philosophy when talking about art is always talking about like its meaning, like what does it mean? So when you say symbolism, are you referring to the fact that each one of your pieces have an inherent meaning to you or are representative of something else? Can you kind of like unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, no problem. That's a good question. So symbolism really started back in I guess it'd be the 1890s with the post-impressionist artist Paul Gauguin, who was a close friend of Vincent van Gogh. Are you familiar?
A little bit.
Okay.
I'm not up to date on my art, so yeah.
That's fair. So Vincent van Gogh, everybody knows the artist who cut off his ear and who did Starry Night. Well, he had a very close friend named Paul Gauguin, And Gauguin was, I believe he was French or Spanish, but what he did was he did a lot of bad things and he also did a lot of good things. But some of the good things that he did was he created the style. He's known as the forefather of symbolism before it became a thing. And what symbolism means is it's where you pretty much deviate from realism and you deviate from abstraction and you make literally symbols in your artwork. So he would have things like he would have a self-portrait of himself and it would be very stylized. So like he'd have a big eye and a big ear. But what he would do that was important to the art movement was he would put things like an apple and a snake in the picture, and he would put a cross and he would put a halo. And so all of these things, you look at them and on the surface, they're very vague and it's just like, what was he on, you know? But then you hear about what he says and you read his letters and you understand that the apple was for temptation and knowledge in the Garden of Eden. The snake, which was also disguised as something else, upon closer inspection, it's also about the Garden of Eden. The halo was representing like him being angelic, and the cross obviously has a significance. So throughout all his paintings, he put these very literally symbolic icons, little motifs, and he believed that that was the champion of art, that surpassed everything, and it made a huge impact in his time and after his life. Yeah.
Gotcha. So is it, you tell me if I'm understanding this correctly. So is it a combination of, you have this like comic influence that you talked about before from the anime and the comics that you read kind of growing up. When did that connection with like symbolism develop? Because you gave a very like academic answer, which I really appreciate because it helped me to understand like the background and the context. But like, when did you start to feel like a particular attachment to that style? Was it always kind of something you did, or did you go through like a realist phase at one point in your life? Like,
Yeah, I went through a lot of phases. Fair point. And I went to SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design. And what they taught there was the importance of concepting and spending the first week to 2 weeks of your project without even touching the canvas, but by using a pen and pad and notepad and sketching out all your ideas and brainstorming and thinking of the symbols and the concepts and the meanings behind everything. And SCAD won in many fields the best art school in the world because of their emphasis on what they call concepting. So I did that in school and then started dabbling in painting on canvas, like you see behind me. I started dabbling, and only, I'd say, maybe this year, 2023, did I really start writing on paper. So maybe 8 to 9 months ago, I started really writing on pen and paper and thinking up like symbols. Thinking of concepts, and then the symbols came into play maybe 6 months ago when I was teaching a art therapy class at the hospital to the patients, and I did a class of a whole lesson plan on Paul Gauguin, hence the
oh,
academic answer.
yeah.
And I got the idea from him and started putting it into my artwork.
What was, and I know we're kind of deviating from the questions I told you I was going to ask you, but I think this is really interesting. What has been, I'm interested to know kind of in general how that lesson played out. Like, how did people respond to it?
Yeah. So it's really cool because in the hospital, there's a lot of lower performing, we call them individuals, who have serious psychiatric problems, and it's very hard for them to speak full sentences. A lot of them don't know how to read and have heavy drug addiction backgrounds. But also, that class, because it's a highly intellectual class, and we go over art history and we go over art appreciation and we study all the masters and we memorize dates and facts. It's like putting like a kindergartner in an MIT course,
Hmm.
because a lot of the guys don't know what we're talking about. So the ones who don't know what I'm talking about, we slow down a little bit and cater to them. But then it also attracts like a highly individualized group of intellectuals to the class who kind of wander in and become like, regulars.
Yeah.
And they all contribute. I mean, I don't know about what your experience with mental illness is, but there's a huge stigma that you're like a crazy artist,
Mhm.
or you're a starving artist, or you can't function. But they're very highly functioning individuals with very high IQs, and they have extensive backgrounds. So we have literal like really good conversations about art and art history, and we learn about the Byzantine Empire, the medieval periods. In a couple of weeks, we're learning about Dante's The Divine Comedy, and we're going to study Botticelli's illustrated book of the Divine Comedy. And they can keep up. There's a lot of like high performers in there. And I don't want to be mean, but when I say like low performers, I mean it respectfully, but they're the ones who are a little disadvantaged. They love it. They comment on it, they talk about it. We don't always know what they're talking about or what they're saying, but it's an awesome class. Yeah.
These seem to be, we have very kind of different pole, and I'm not here to like psychoanalyze you or anything.
Yeah, yeah.
But we have very different, like, not that I could in the first place, but it's interesting to me that you have on the one hand Andrew the artist, and on the other hand Andrew who works in mental health. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about how that came about, because and then we have this connection with art therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did that happen? And yeah, what are your like general thoughts on the connection between art and mental health care?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me think about that. You said art and mental health care, the connections.
Yeah, first of all, what got you into mental health care? Like, was it just like
Mm.
happenstance? You just kind of needed a job type of situation, or were you always kind of drawn to it? And then, second part, like, what do you think the connection between art and mental health care is or can be, specifically with the art therapy aspect?
No, that's awesome. So I think your first question was what got me into the state
Mm.
psychiatric hospital job. And that was very intentional because when I was 21, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia with mental illness also. And I had a really hard time with that. And so when I was graduated college at 20, 26 or 27, and I was working as a dishwasher, with a degree from the most prestigious art school in considerably the world. And I'm working minimum wage washing dishes, and I was feeling really down. And I said, Dad, it's time for me to get a real job because graphic design is not paying the bills. So I sat down with a pen and paper and I did some serious concepting like they taught me at school, but about my job. And I thought, like, what's my purpose? What is my mission? What do I stand for? What do I want to do? What will offer the greatest reward personally and spiritually? And the answer that I came up with was working in mental health. So I searched jobs and searched state jobs, the state of Georgia, found an entry level position at a psychiatric hospital. And I don't know if you guys know, I mean, Mike, but an entry level job at a psych hospital is not the most glamorous.
Mm.
You're getting paid $12 an hour, and I was working on the floor with the mental patients, and I'm feeding them and giving them medicine, and cleaning up after them when they poop their bed or pee their pants. And, we got in a lot of physical altercations, which was where a lot of the Zen and self control of martial arts came into play.
Yeah.
And I've never been happier
No.
than when I was doing all that. Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that, Andrew. I didn't mean for it to get like so personal, but and I'm more than happy to take that out if you want me to. But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. There's a lot of still today, there's a lot of stigma associated with mental illness and
Yeah.
treatment of mental illness. I mean, I myself struggle with a form of mental illness. Most people that you know, or at least one person that you know, probably does, right? And the fact that conversations, especially in the United States, have our solution to mental illness is just not to talk about it and pretend it doesn't exist and that it'll go away. And of course, it doesn't. So yeah, I appreciate your sincerity in sharing that. I know that's not a always an easy conversation.
Well, Mike, to answer your question, actually, so my job right now is to segue after working at the as a what's called a health aide on the floor at the mental place. I got a promotion and worked at what's called a treatment mall, which is a big mall, like a gymnasium with classrooms and TVs, and it's like an entertainment center, a rec center for the what we call individuals, but what I call peers, because I got promoted to be a peer specialist. Which, are you familiar with the peer specialist?
Not really, no.
So it's somebody who has a mental illness and who's been through recovery and who can
Gotcha.
like they can be like a peer to the individuals and mentor them through the recovery. So when
Hmm.
you ask me about, like, is it too much for me to share? It's like that's my job, is to share my
Okay.
story. Yeah.
That's awesome. No, I
Thanks,
didn't know
man.
that. I've heard of that. I've never heard it called peer specialist, but I know that there's similar positions when it comes to like treatment for addiction and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. We have
so
those.
so what is the let's go back to that art therapy bit because I'm really interested in that. Um, what has been your experience with utilizing art therapy? And like you can approach this like philosophically, what's the connection between art and healthcare, or however practically you want to. I'll let you be the judge of that.
Nice. Okay, cool. So I don't call it an art therapy group. It's technically called Expressive Arts Open Studio. And I really just try to give them like an escape from all the groups in the hospital, because the groups that they go to in the hospital, if you can imagine like a giant gymnasium and it's got classrooms all down the side. And in every classroom, you have 8 or 9 individuals file in and they go learn something, and some of them have been there for 5 or 6 years. So they've been to the same groups 5 days a week for the past 5 years, and they kind of want to get away from the standard groups that you would see, such as coping skills, social skills, cognitive behavioral therapy, stuff they find really boring. So what
Mhm.
I try to do is sit them in the class, and we have 3 classes that are lectures, but it's really discussions where I do like you're doing. I do less of me talking and more of getting them to talk.
Mhm.
And, because I don't feel like anybody wants to sit there and listen to like me or you, we don't, you know.
Mhm.
So I ask them questions and we do like live discussions and we watch videos about art. And if you look on YouTube, all the videos are engaging, they're cool, they're flashy, and we learn about some really cool stuff that you may think like, I don't know, Mike, if you have a hobby, but you may think like, oh, I don't know if anybody can relate to this hobby. I'm probably just geeking out over it all the time. And like you're wondering, like when I'm talking about this, is everybody's eyes glassing over? But when I talk
Mhm.
to the peers about art and art history, like they light up and they
Mhm.
love the dates and the places and the names. And those who come from a higher status background, people from a higher economic background who
Mhm.
feel a little belittled by being in a state hospital, they can kind of like be a little sophisticated and say what they know. And
Yeah.
then on the fourth day of the lesson plan, we do a practical art project where we apply everything we learned in the past 3 classes to that to the project. And they're all really cool. They're really cool projects. We do fun stuff. Um, and so I think it's really about just getting them stimulated, like intellectually stimulated, rather than being bored at the hospital. Yeah.
Right. No, that's a really good way of putting it because, like, from you saying that, what I was thinking is like a lot of these institutions, whether they be like mental health institutions or like the prison system and institution, can be very dehumanizing for people. Prison's probably more explicitly so, like your rights are stripped away and you're stripped, you're physically stripped down going into it and searched, and it seems to take away people's like personhood. But mental health can also be like that, right? Because there's an
Yeah.
aspect, a prison like aspect to it. So it, yeah, I could definitely see how allowing them that creativity and free thinking and to get those creative juices flowing and to flex those muscles would bring back some of that humanness to the place that they happen to be in. I don't know.
Yeah, and they feel like their opinion's valued.
Yeah.
When I say, like, I'll give you an example. Like, I'll say, like, hey, Mike, what do you think about this painting, and how does it represent your lifestyle right now when you look at it?
Mm.
And like, they have that deep question, and like, you'd be able to talk all about like yourself, and how you relate to that art. So it gives them some specialized attention.
Can we break down one of your pieces?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. This is the piece that Andrew shared with me that he's going to tell us a little bit about. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah, start off. I don't know exactly you want to approach this, but yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, no problem, Mike. I've actually brought my sketchbook that has all the work that I did for some of these projects, and I brought the notebook for this one. And I thought this one would be interesting for you, Mike, and your viewers, because it looks very seemingly unassuming, and it looks
Mhm.
like a landscape. And yeah, it's drawn really nice, but it's like it doesn't really appear like there's too much concepting behind it. So what started out, I don't know if you can see this, Mike.
Let me pull this down for a second and
Yeah.
make that a little bit. Yeah, let's zoom in there.
So
Okay.
that's like a word bubble. You see, it's called a mind map.
Yeah.
And what that does is it allows you to associate your ideas that are very illogically connected and that don't have any connection. And they come out of your subconscious when you're writing down and connecting words. And then that word connects another word. So you use that as the base example to start off your concepting.
Okay.
And that activity there I circled such words as mysteries, Jesus, duality, romantic love, together, divine natural connection. And then the next step was to do questions to myself about those words that I circled. So, for example, one of my questions was, what is a divine natural connection? And I put mindfulness in nature, deep breathing, witnessing yourself, observing yourself breathing and existing. So, a lot of deep, kind of like meditative, mindful answers. And that went on and on. And you see, as we go along, I have kind of sketches that come up, and
Let me
then
zoom in.
and this came up based on a Native American prompt that I had in this project, which was thinking about like the divine animals that the Native Americans worshipped, such as the eagle. And it kind of takes off like that. So it's very organized, and at the same time, it's unorganized. And then that got into what are called word associations, which is where you write one of the word that you did in the mind map. You would write that down, and then you would write after that a word that comes to mind when you think of that. So, for instance, one of the words is breath. And if I can show you again, please, I put breath, and I connected all the words with little colons to show how they were connected subconsciously.
Mm.
Thank you. And that led to such things as Primus energy, source energy, mindfulness, thoughts, think tank, witnessing yourself, breathing. And it turned into a project about me and my wife, which is what most of the projects are about. And then after that came the free writing, which was where have you ever heard of Jack Kerouac, the author?
Yeah, On the Road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you know anything about him?
Not him personally, no.
He's a very cool guy, but he wrote what's called spontaneous prose, which is where
Hmm.
you write and you just write and you write and you don't think about it. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept. And
Yeah.
spontaneous prose was actually really made popular by Marcel Proust. Are you familiar with him?
Yes. Not like super familiar, but I've heard the
Yeah.
name. Yeah.
I figure as a guy in philosophy, you must have come across him, because he was famous for writing the philosophy of love, which was in his novel. It was I think it was a 1 million word novel, a set of 7 volumes. So Jack Kerouac copied Marcel Proust and decided to write very quickly without thinking and using imagery in his writing. And they were usually fueled by benzos and marijuana and drinking, which is unfortunate. for anybody to have to role model that, but the writing was good. Um, so the next step in the writing process was doing that spontaneous prose and seeing what comes to mind using the prompt that you thought of in the previous concepting. I wish I had given you these PDFs to cycle through. Yeah, I decided it all the work came down to doing a landscape, right? So what you see, but I decided to do a series of 3. I think this is the first one out of 3. And it's actually Africa. It's Mount Kilimanjaro.
Oh,
And
okay.
my wife and I, she did her ancestry test, and it turns out that she has a large percentage of Nigerian in her Nigerian genes. These 3 paintings are the 3 places where, I believe that we met in past lives, and the last piece is where we hope to meet in our next life. So this is Nigeria, this is Mount Kilimanjaro. And what I did was actually create a whole backstory about characters that meet in this setting here. And the woman's name was Nkichi, which is Nigerian for the one given by God. And the male character in this painting's name, who is symbolized by me, his name was Adebayo, which means he came in a joyful time. So the whole series is about 2 lovers who meet in 3 different places in 3 different lifetimes, and they come together. And then I did some more sketches, and the second one, which I didn't show you, is in Savannah, Georgia, and then the last one is in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. But I'd like to read you a short paragraph that I wrote about the painting that we're talking about the Mount Kilimanjaro painting. It goes, grassed, vast open expanses, tall and short shrubs and trees scattered about, wildfires, indigenous populations, seasonal animal migrations based on the wet and dry seasons, birds of prey, insects, Mount Kilimanjaro. And then here's a sketch, if I can show you, please. This is the light's kind of glaring it, but this was the initial sketch for the drawing.
Yeah, we can
and you see how they're similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the process for that, Mike. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Wow, that's awesome.
Thanks.
Do you do that for all your pieces where you're kind of like writing a backstory to it? Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Ever since the past 8 months when I saw that Paul Gauguin project that I was talking to you about.
Yeah, and like I said before, I'm going to link Andrew's portfolio. By all means, he's got some amazing artwork. And I'll also put a way to contact Andrew. Or you have contact information on your portfolio website?
Yes. Mm-hmm. You can just
Yeah,
email me on the, yeah.
And you said you had some questions for us to talk about. Is that right?
I'd love to. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got them written down right here because I think you're a super interesting guy and you have a lot of cool stuff to talk about. And I've been listening to some of your podcasts about philosophy that I assume you teach your students.
Mm-hmm.
And you had some things on religion. And I thought those ones were really cool on religion because I'm a very open-minded young man who is exploring spirituality like many of us are. And so your podcast on, I think it was Wicca and eclectic
Paganism, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really cool to listen to that and like learn a little bit about it. So I wanted to know, please, Mike, how does art tie into Eastern religion and philosophy?
Oh man, you tested me here? Oh man. Well, so first and foremost, let me do a shout out here. So I have several interviews on my channel. The interview about paganism was with Candace Griffith, who's a practicing pagan. So she talked about her background and experience. I like to interview people of different religious faiths. But yeah, Andrew, as you said, I also teach philosophy and religion. Now, your question was, say it one more time so I can rethink about this.
Yeah, how does art tie into Eastern religion and philosophy?
Yes. So I recently made a video on Taoism, and I think there's a a really strong connection here because in Taoism specifically, there's this concept of Wu Wei, which doesn't have a great translation, and it's really difficult to explain, but it's translated as effortless action or non-action action. And I think the best way to explain it is not through talking about it, but through doing it. And one of the best ways to do it is actually through like martial arts, right? So Andrew and I go to a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym together. Um, and with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, when you're rolling, when you're grappling with each other, I don't know about you, Andrew, but I oftentimes enter into like a very like meditative state. In the sense that like I don't have any distractions. I'm forgetting about the bills I gotta pay and the stuff I gotta do at work the next day. And it's a flow state, right? And
Yep.
so within Eastern philosophy, there's this idea that that some forms of practice reveal like these philosophical principles. So and art's another big example of that. The Taoists have a bunch of different types of art that are supposed to express Wu Wei, and the artist himself or herself is also like participating in or experiencing the states of flow or Wu Wei, if you want to talk about it from a more like religious, spiritual angle. So yeah, I think it goes to answer your question more succinctly. Like I think the connection goes all the way back to the earliest forms of, especially like Chinese philosophy specifically. I see it there. I don't
Can
know if
are
that's a good
you
answer, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Are you more experienced with Western philosophy or Eastern philosophy?
Um, my my academic area of expertise is in Western philosophy, um, more so the philosophy of science. Um, but when I teach philosophy, I try to give a balance. So when I teach like an intro class, I try to teach as much quote unquote Eastern philosophy as I do Western philosophy. Nowadays, it's all kind of running together, but yeah.
Do you, by any chance, know anything about the science of the Renaissance in that period?
Um, I know a little bit. So my background is in the history of science, but it's more so early 20th century science and not earlier forms of science. So yeah.
Cool. So I wanted to know if you could please talk a little bit about what you know about Japanese and Chinese art, if you know anything like that.
Not really about the art. Art history is I am not knowledgeable about.
I'm
I'm
sorry,
no, go
maybe
ahead.
Japanese philosophy and how it relates to like Taoism.
Hmm. Yeah. So a lot of, and you just stop me if I start like rambling on too much here. But and I don't have a strong background in Japanese philosophy specifically, but I know that Japanese philosophy is influenced from a very early time period by Buddhist thinking and Buddhist philosophy, which of course comes from Southeast Asia, Nepal to China to Japan. That's the kind of the flow of the transition there. Um, and in Japan specifically, we get like unique forms of Buddhism in the form of like Zen Buddhism, right? Which is distinctly Japanese in nature. But um, traditional Japanese like folk beliefs, I think are kind of represented in, and I'm drawing a complete blank here because I didn't know Andrew was going to give me a philosophy test. Shinto is what I'm trying to think of. Um, but yeah, I would say that the big early influences anyway on Japanese thought are Buddhist and Shinto in nature. Yeah.
Cool. And then I wanted to know about martial arts, which
Yeah.
was how can a martial artist practice martial arts with an eye towards Zen and mindfulness?
Oh, I want to hear your response to this question too, because I'm interested to what you have to say. But um, what I think let me give a non-answer to that, and then I want to hear what you say, because what I find interesting about martial arts, especially because of the violence of it. Like I'm trying to think about how to put this. Like martial arts, you have it in the name, this combination of like controlled violence and on the same time like art. And it turns a lot of people off because of the violent nature. And we don't really tend to think of violence as beautiful, but we do think of art as beautiful. But there can be a form of, not to sound like a psychopath or something, but there can be a form of beauty in the violence, in the form of like doing a move well, or watching somebody like execute something like nicely, I guess is the right word. I don't know. How would you, I feel like you're setting me up here. You answer. What would you say?
Fair enough. So I don't know if do you know Jamie, the brown belt? Jamie, purple belt, brown belt.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so Jamie really mentored me in the beginning of my jiu-jitsu career, and I actually trained with Jamie back at the gym on Victory when James was early on, and Jamie has a background in kung fu,
Mhm.
and I think he studied for a few years, and so he teaches me when we roll how to use kung fu principles in jiu-jitsu, which I'm sure you're familiar because you talked about in your podcast, like Bruce Lee talking about being like water, and kung fu uses a lot of philosophy. And
Yep.
so Jamie taught me how to be like water. When I'm rolling with you, you and I roll, but I'm not like meeting resistance with resistance. You'll move one way and I'll go with you, and then you counter that. And so I go in the direction that you're countering. So kind of being like water, I guess.
That's a really good way of putting it, because, and not everybody, I guess, is going to have this experience when they do martial arts, because people are different, right? And
Mm-hmm.
usually the first couple of times you do something, and by the way, a big shout out to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Savannah, which is where you and I both train. James is an absolutely fantastic instructor. If you're in the Savannah area, like, by all means stop by. Absolutely amazing place to train. But yeah, like when you first do something like jujitsu, for a lot of people, it's just like survival and like panic. And it's like the opposite of Zen, right? Because you're like
Yeah.
a fight or flight kicks in, and you're like afraid for your life. In some cases, I remember the first time I trained in a gi. Before I did jujitsu, I used to box, and boxing's very also very intensive, of course. Obviously, it's been a while since I boxed. I'm not in near as great shape as I used to be, but I remember the first time training a gi, and somebody got me in side control, and of course we were rolling and sweating, and the gi was over my face, and it was almost like I couldn't breathe. Well, not almost like I couldn't breathe, like I couldn't breathe, and I was like freaking out. And of course, like I was just like trying to push the guy off of me, and like not it was the opposite of Zen. But
Yeah.
the more I've done it, there's there's develops like a certain level of being, I'm not always comfortable in those positions, but there does develop a level of being comfortable. And what I really love about it is it's very analogous to like life situations. Um, to extend this metaphor of like fighting in life, because life oftentimes for most people is a struggle. um, Struggle to survive on a basic instinctual level, but a struggle to accomplish your goals and your hopes and your dreams, and to build relationships. Relationships are always, there's an analogy there, because relationships are very difficult, and there's a struggle to make the relationship better. But yeah, to me, Zen is the experience of Zen, or I would say more so like flow. I don't know if I've experienced Zen, but definitely a flow state has taken time. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but yeah, that would
Yeah.
be my
Yeah.
approach to it.
Yeah. Like being uncomfortable and relating that to
Mm.
like relationships and work, and kind of progressing from beginner to, medium to advanced. That being said, I wanted to ask you another question, if that's okay, Mike.
Sure.
about mental health,
Hmm.
and I wanted to know what's your definition of success in mental health as it relates to a person trying to succeed in everyday life?
That's a good question, Andrew. Um, Let me qualify this by saying, and I want to hear your answer to this too, but
Yeah.
let me qualify this by saying that I am not a mental health professional. So please take everything I say with a grain of salt. And if you feel like you are, if anybody out there is listening to this that is struggling with something, by all means, seek out a licensed mental health care professional. There's a lot of help out there, as I'm sure that Andrew can attest to. He works in the field, a lot of fantastic resources out there. So, my understanding of success with respect to mental health is that,
Yes.
yeah. Um, it's hard because we treat success as like, so I work in education, and for somebody to successfully graduate, let's say to graduate high school, you take X, Y, and Z classes. You have to take your four math classes, your four science, and your history, and your foreign language. And once you do that, successfully completing that means you graduated. Boom, you graduated. Here's your diploma. You're done. Congratulations. But with that's not really how I think that's not how I view success within the context of mental health. Because, for example, you shared about your mental health background. Since I was a kid, I've struggled with depression. I've, you know, went to therapy. I have treatment for depression. It's something that I've had and struggled with basically my whole life. And there's no like depression is not like a broken leg. You break your leg and you get a cast and they put it back in place and they fix it, and after a year you're done, right?
Right.
There's no like congratulations, your depression is cured. It's always there. Like, and it's still there, although I would say I've been relatively successful dealing with it, coping with it, learning to live with it, learning to process it, learning to recognize when I'm having intrusive thoughts, learning to know when I'm forming like false narratives in my head. And so that's, I would say, is like success with respect to mental health. But yeah, it's not success in the sense that like Michael no longer has depression success. The depression's gonna be there, right? I don't know. What would you say to that?
So I would say you're absolutely right, which is that like for you, you'll probably have depression. If you treat it, you'll be fine. But like you'll probably have it for the rest of your life, right? Because
Hmm.
I don't think they've thought of a cure for depression, and they haven't thought of a cure for schizophrenia either.
Right.
So, I'll be taking that medicine every day for the rest of my life until they invent a cure. And I'm sure so are you, or doing your coping mechanisms. But I think really success in mental health is making the right decisions. Because Michael, the main problem with mental health patients in Georgia and the whole world is that they don't take their medicine.
Yeah.
That's it. And if 99% of the patients or mentally challenged or mentally ill people would just take their medicine, the whole healthcare system would be revolutionized. So to answer your question, just taking your medicine, I think.
To that point, medication literally saved my life.
Yeah.
Like it absolutely did. So yeah, that's fantastic advice. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you one question, please, and you can go as fast or slow as you want. But how do you ponder the meaning to life, and what is your meaning to living?
Wow. Just saving the big guns. Okay. Let me be let me start off by being a really stereotypical philosopher for a second. I'm sorry in advance, but in philosophy, we make a distinction. There's two kind of questions here. Um, so a lot of people ask, like, what is the meaning of life? And that implies that there's a meaning to life as a whole, a universal meaning that everybody would have access to, or that we all have to figure out, or that there's meaning to the universe as a whole. Um, that's one question. Um, I, as weird as it would sound, I'm more interested in what I would call meaning in life. The meaning of life question, I think, really hinges on a lot of metaphysical ideas, such as the existence of some sort of inbuilt inherent purpose in the universe, or to human existence as a whole. If we talk about meaning in life, then we can talk about meaning on an individual level. And what's important to me about meaning in life is that regardless of your beliefs about the supernatural, about God, about what happened before the universe started, we all have to answer what the meaning of our life is, regardless of what we think about the rest of it, because we still have to live. And so philosophically, I'm interested in meaning in life, and I actually last year presented at the it sounds more crazy than it is. The fourth international conference of meaning in life studies. Uh, and I presented a paper on time and meaning. But what I would say, Andrew, is very much so in line with a lot of, in philosophy, the existentialist thinkers like Søren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, who would say that, and you're talking everything from Christians to atheists to Muslims. A lot of lots of different people have been existentialists, but they're still focused on this question of meaning in life, and they would all say that meaning is something that we as individuals construct. And I think there's different ways that people construct meaning. One is through art, creativity. I think creativity, production brings people purpose and meaning. Um, I divide it into the good, the true, and the beautiful being art, the good being ethical actions and decisions, dedicating your life to helping other people, dedicating your life to helping your family, to raising good kids, to having a loving relationship with your spouse, to helping the poor, to working in mental health, service. And the true, which is the seeking out and the search for knowledge, for understanding what exactly we're doing here, who put us here, and how the world works, right? A life dedicated to like the pursuit of science or philosophy or whatever other disciplines, sociology, psychology. All of that is what gives meaning, can give meaning, instruction, purpose. But the big takeaway, I think, is that it's something that's constructed, that it's something that's built by the individual.
Awesome. Totally agree.
What would you say?
So I would say that, yeah, that's definitely true, because we need to focus less on the world sometimes and more on ourselves. And that's awesome that you get to speak at that convention. That was literally what we're talking about. Um, and I mean, talking about like Sarta,
Yeah,
citizen.
some people say Sartre, some people say Sartre.
Okay,
I don't.
sorry.
I read some French. I don't speak it, so I don't know.
So Sartre and Nietzsche
Hmm.
and Camus, right? Albert Camus.
Hmm.
And that was all cool. I know you could probably speak for a long time about those guys. And then you're also, I think you're just talking about, it sounds to me a lot like personal development in my language,
Yeah,
working on yourself, letting the chips fall because you have what we would hope would be a positive psychology, right? So, I mean,
100%.
yeah. And see, like, I think in philosophy, you relate in terms of like academics. Of course, you have other areas of your life, but you relate like academics and philosophy. and like science. And for me, working in mental health, I'm more like art and personal development and like abstract kind of stuff. So it's really cool, this combination that we have going on here.
Well, I think you need both. I mean, you have to have both at some level, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's kind of like yin and yang, you know,
Hmm.
for you being science and mathematics and like philosophy, and I'm sure probably a little bit history.
Yeah.
You're talking to a guy who's like art and like, fun, fun jumping around stuff.
Hmm.
And so that's, I think, what would you say is the yin and what would you say is the yang out of science and art?
It's hard to. It's. I don't know. That's like a impossible question, Andrew. Which means it's a really good question, right? Um,
Yeah.
I have a so the philosopher that I specialize in. His name's Gaston Bachelard. He's a French thinker, and for him, science is it's interesting. I don't want to get too bogged down here, but Bachelard was really unique and confusing for a lot of people because he wrote books on. He was one of the um, he's writing in the early 20th century, and he was one of the first like French philosophers to accept and to embrace the implications of Einstein's theory of relativity. So he's writing a lot about science and the implications of physics and problems related to like uh, the uncertainty principle and electrons and what that means and the metaphysical implications of all that. So on the one hand, he's writing about like science, but then he turns around and like writes a book on like poetry. And for Bachelard, the two are, we tend to think of them as two separate sorts of thinking. But Bachelard's argument is that the same sort of creativity and imagination that is obvious with the poet in how they use and form language, or the artist, is the same sort of creativity for like an Einstein. It's just being expressed in a different way. Einstein's not
Yeah.
drawing pictures, but he is bringing a radically new interpretation of like geometry, for example, an abstraction of geometry that wasn't present before. So on the one hand, I don't think there's that big of a separation in the sense that they both, I think, are inherently creative. Although there are mechanical aspects to both, as I'm sure you could teach us a couple of different lessons on artistic techniques, right?
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
doesn't make the art any less creative. Likewise, you go take an algebra class and they could teach you the different formulas and equations that you need to solve a problem, just like if you're doing like a Sudoku problem or something like that. But there's still a level of creativity that's present there. So yeah, that's what I would say. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
There can be a yin and yang. Like I can definitely see that, but at the same time, I think to go back to Taoism, there's an underlying unity to it all, right?
Yeah. And, you were talking about early 1900s um, science. And if you go back to what we were talking about earlier, what I asked you about Leonardo da Vinci, was he was like the first artist to merge science and art. He
Hmm.
was studying water and like drawing water and the way it rippled around a bridge, and he would drop rocks and like draw the ripples, how it looked. And so that was the first time it had been done. And actually, Leonardo da Vinci, I'm sure you know about him,
A little
pioneered
bit.
so much.
Hmm.
He drew botanical drawings of leaves and plants and herbs that are still used today. And you can identify the plants that he drew. It must have been, I think it's been about 500 years. You can still identify the plants that he drew 500 years ago based on his drawings. And you can still use some of his anatomical drawings where he dissected the cadavers. You can still use those to do medical experiments. So that was the first time that had been done, was in like, I think it was 1500 on the dot. to like 1530 or whatever, was the first time that like really science and art had been merged.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Da Vinci's a super interesting person to read and to learn about.
Yeah. Yeah. He was really cool. He actually was one of like people use the term Renaissance man,
Mm-hmm.
but he was a self-taught Renaissance man because his parents gave him a good education, but not like all the other boys were getting. So he taught himself how to read and write essentially, and then he went to study with a man named Verrocchio, who was a
Mm-hmm.
prominent Italian. I think it was Venetian, no, Florentine, a Florentine artist. It would be like it'd be like interning with like Foucault, Michel Foucault or something,
Mm-hmm.
and he learned everything he could, and then at the end of his life, he's a court painter for like the king and the queen of Florence, or Spain or wherever it was at that time. But yeah, so I also studied him for another for another group that I was teaching, and that's
Yeah.
how you learn, right? I'm sure you've learned a lot of stuff for your classes by teaching the class. You have to learn for it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for talking. I appreciate your questions. It was it's a great conversation. I don't get too many people that want to like ask me questions when I ask to interview them, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
And I'm going to include Andrew's links in the description of this video. And by all means, go check out his work. It is amazing. Thanks again, Andrew.
Anytime, Mike. I appreciate you.